Welcome to Reddit Aliens. Native Americans of Reddit, what are your or your tribe's ghost stories, legends, or supernatural occurrences? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Uktena. It's a legend about a horned snake in Salagi, Cherokee legend. Uktena is said to be very large and round like a tree trunk, with horns on his head. The only way to wound him is to shoot at a singular spot on his forehead that emits bright light. It's similar to a diamond. If you defeat Uktena, you become a miracle worker, a great warrior. Yet, once you see the light of his forehead, you run toward it instead of trying to escape. Even to see Uktena sleeping is death, not to the hunter, but to his family. My tribe talks about a beast called, rough translation here, the Flame Walker. Spirits who take the form of a small blue flame that leads people into the swamps and bogs, where they eventually drown or otherwise vanish. Yes, they are basically will-o-wisps. Another are the water-faced hunters. Again, rough translation, and I'm not heavily involved with my tribe these days. These creatures have faces that act like a pool of water, reflecting the face of anyone who looks them in the eyes. They mercilessly hunt down the people who acknowledge them. The only way to avoid them is to not speak to or others interact with a stranger, unless you can see their face from the corner of your eye. We also have the more traditional skinwalker type legends, as well as the bogmen. My tribe is considered part of the Abenaki, but are actually a smaller sub-tribe. Basically, when it came down to it, there were not enough of the tribe to actually be considered a tribe anymore. Today we number fewer than 200, and only 8 of those are more than half-blooded. My biological father and his brother, as well as my paternal grandparents, are the last 4 full-blooded of my tribe. This post today definitely challenged me in the way to pronunciate some of these words, so I apologize if I missed a few, but I did look some of them up, so all the best. But speaking of this story specifically, the last 4 of your tribe that are full-blooded, that's pretty cool. Good luck. Dene, from northern British Columbia here. My mom used to always tell me stories of Neguni, or bushmen, wild men, when I was young. They were people who lived in the forest and took away people who wandered too far out, specifically children. I always figured these stories were created by my people to serve 2 purposes. First, to teach young children to not wander far off, and second, to give explanations to kidnappings done by other tribes, which was a fairly common occurrence even up until the early to mid-20th century. My grandmother's brother was taken by Cree from Alberta and raised by them. They had assumed he had died until decades later when they were reunited and learned what had happened. When the humans slept, dogs would get together and party, but not before taking their tails off. They'd dance the entire night, put their tails back on, and return home. But one time, a coyote found them and all the dogs had to scramble away to their homes for safety, but a lot of them grabbed the wrong tail. They never danced again at night because they were afraid of the coyote, so they were stuck with weird mismatched tails for the rest of their lives. I'm Cherokee, and growing up the Uktena horned serpent really freaked me out. The mountain my family lived on has these mysterious glowing lights that, according to legend, was from the Uktena trying to trick people into finding it. There is also Spearfinger, an old lady who can transform you into your loved ones and eat your liver. So the first one is called Siatko. Don't know the translation in English. Lived at this lake, and it was his spot. We do not go there, or he will kill you. Used to have nightmares about him based on what I was taught as a kid. Like how you could stand at the edge of the water and be looking in, and he would come out of it and just grab you. But then the mountain blew up and filled in the lake, so don't know if he's still around or not. The second, I don't remember the name, but translated into English is dangerous being who lives in rivers and drowns people. Anthropologists think it was our way of describing dangerous log jams and whirlpools in our river. The raven is why we have light. He was selfish and greedy and tried to steal the light from a box after tricking a girl into opening the box. The girl's father had raised her to never ever open the box ever. They lived in total darkness. They didn't know what the world or one another looked like, etc. He, the tricky raven, tricked her by masking himself as a person in a world with only 2 people and causing the person to fall in love with him. Once the box containing light was open, the raven stole it, dropped it, it broke, and Earth got lit. I'll find a link to a much more descriptive storytelling. We have a spirit similar in Aboriginal culture. It's called a Mimi spirit. Basically, when you go walk about, this spirit, day or night, will try and trick you into following it. It will appear, you walk to it, and it's vanished. It will appear again, you again follow, before to disappear. Repeat this multiple times and you're lost forever. I was 7 when I first actually met an elder whose son was taken by the Mimi spirit. I'll never forget her broken face when she told my class. Not me, but my fiancé is 50% native. She said that when she was a kid, her mom, who lived and associated with their tribe frequently, was told to take her and her siblings to the storm shelter and to lock the doors because the owls were coming. In her tribe, it is believed that owls were possessed by unkind spirits and would come back to haunt people who had harmed them during their life. Her mom, who was just a child then, had followed her parents' orders and had taken her and her siblings to the shelter, but she hadn't locked the door. She opened the door and above her she saw a swarm of owls flying over her and the other nearby homes that also housed other people of the tribe. She said they all flew past the nearby homes and never saw the occurrence happen again. But until this day, her mom gets nervous and uneasy when she sees an owl. I'm Simshian, and we seem to have a lot of shapeshifters, which some are questionable. I think a lot of them are similar to the idea of skinwalkers, but some of the shapeshifters, like Raven, have been a huge part of getting the things we need, like the moon and stars, although mostly through trickery. I've known some people who swear they've come into contact with shapeshifters that usually end up being like a mimic of someone they know, usually someone with them, but are often faceless. There was apparently a ghost war once. Mosquitoes were once a bloodthirsty group of people. Here's a non-scary legend from the Osage, the story of the medicine spider. Long ago, when the people were young, the chiefs of the many clans of the Osage sought out different animals to become symbols of their people, to impart wisdom and strength to them. The chief of the isolated earth, troubled because he had yet to find such an animal, went out hunting for food and to quest for his people's symbol. After he had been hunting for some time, he came across the hoofprint of a massive stag. "Ah," he said, "Grandfather dear, reveal yourself to me, so that you may bring your strength to my people," and began to track the stag so that he could take it as a symbol. For many hours he tracked the stag, and gradually the tracks became fresher as he started to catch up. However, he was so focused on following the tracks of the stag that he did not lift his eyes from the ground, and did not notice that his path would lead him directly into a spider's web. The web was massive and strong, and the chief was caught just enough to impede his passage for a moment. In anger, he struck at the spider, but it dodged his blow and scurried out of reach before proceeding to scold him. "Grandson," said the spider, "why do you strike at me when it's your own carelessness that has caused you to walk into my web? What has you so preoccupied that you cannot watch where you are going? Why do you walk as a blind man?" The chief of the isolated earth suddenly felt foolish, but felt compelled to answer the spider. "I was following the tracks of a great stag, so that it may be a symbol of my clan and bring strength to our people." The spider replied that it could be such a symbol, and the chief scoffed at it. "You are such a small, weak thing. How could you bring strength to my people?" The spider answered, "Where I am, I build my home, and where I build my home, all things come to it. Should your people learn this patience, they shall become strong indeed." The chief saw the wisdom of this and went home, satisfied. And so the medicine spider became a symbol for the isolated earth and one of the symbols of the Osage people. Traditionally, the medicine spider is depicted as a stylized black widow. I think the chief made a wise choice and learned a great lesson, so great story. From an inland PNW reservation, we have stories of little people, stick Indians, and of course Bigfoot. Little people are garden gnome-sized people that live in the hills and caves and pretty much live their own lives. I can't remember a whole lot of their story or lore. Stick Indians are spirits that take either a blue, green, or red light form. The formers are considered good, and if you're lost will lead you home off of to a familiar trail. The The latter are evil and will lead you over deadfalls or cliffs and try to hurt you. Everyone knows the Bigfoot stories. The one thing about them that may be unique is that they communicate by beating sticks against trees and hitting rocks together. My favorite stories came from my Navajo friend about skinwalkers. So I know we have the Apache Death Cave. That's actually real though, but it's a great read for people looking for ghost stories. I was told a story by my great-grandmother. A mountain spirit was angry about the way that the white men had hurt the land by breaking the mountains and tainting the waters. So he came up with a plan. He pretended to be a white man and convinced people he had found a mine. Every day he would appear to be growing richer and richer. Finally, the white men grew greedy and decided to take the mine for themselves, followed the spirit into the mountain. Every day men would try to follow the spirits into the mountains, but none ever returned. This continued every day because the white men cared more about the copper than the mountains, land, and water. It is still happening even today. The spirit takes their bodies somewhere they can never return to the land they abused. I'm Cherokee, and my family has always had supernatural things going on. Though there are a lot of cool, scary stories to tell, one in particular popped up in my head when I read the question: the deer woman. My stepmom always said she was Deer Clan. Because of this, she never ate any deer whatsoever. I never knew the reason why till after she became extremely ill, because my dad tricked her into eating deer jerky one day. She told me that anyone who ate deer in her clan usually gets a warning by getting sick, but if they continued eating deer they would die. This is because the deer woman would come for them, because they had done wrong. Then, she went further down the road of making me not eat any jerky for a while by saying, every year, a person in her clan is taken by the deer woman. This is at powwows, of course. When everyone goes home, you'll hear the next day that someone turned up dead or went missing, never to be found. Is what she told me in between moments of dizziness? I was around 7 or 8 at the time, and her being my stepmom, I thought I was going to die because all I ate was deer jerky that day. I'm too late, but worth a shot. You did it. Do Inuit count? Yes. I'm from the northern Canada, Nunavut. There are shadow figures called chaneque, or the shadow people. It is believed that you can see them from the corner of your eyesight. When you see a chaneque, you would take another look, or you swore you saw something in the form of a shadow or haze. I have heard that they are rather creepy, and they give you the feeling of being watched or a slight anxious if someone is following you. Another legend is called Idriat, translated people who hide. Idriat are entities that you would see in the barren Arctic in the far hills. The Idriat people have the power to shapeshift into other creatures or people, really similar to the Navajo legend Skinwalker, although never harming Inuit. It is believed that the entities observe Inuit and follow them, but I've never heard Idriat harming Inuit. An Inuk elder explained that the Idriat can live human lives or imitating humans, or even marry other human beings while pretending to be Inuit. Camping in the Arctic is creepy, and you would have the expectation that you would encounter entities, especially how the Arctic is so vast and empty. Mexican here. We were tribesmen too. We just built a bit of an empire, so I'll tell you the story of the chaneque. These creeps are young children with the faces of old men, and not much is known about them. They live in the deserts and jungles of Mexico, and the legend goes that if you see one and follow it, you'll lose either 3 or 7 days. My grandfather always told me that if you lose 7 days to a chaneque, they follow you home, and they try their absolute best to drive you to insanity, depression, or suicide. If you lose 3 days, it means one of 2 things will happen. The first is that you'll go to war, where you will die a brutal but glorious death. The second is that you will be the victim of a great tragedy, lose your life savings, break both legs, lose family, that sort of thing. If you turn your back on the chaneque, it will transform into a great and terrible jaguar, and you'll be devoured. To avoid this fate, you must back away from it, avoiding eye contact at all costs. For you make eye contact, it will steal your soul. When you can no longer see it, you must pray, and pray hard. I'm not quite sure how well this monster is known throughout Mexico, or if it is even told the same, but I know that this story has been in my family for generations. My grandfather's grandfather told him, my father's grandfather told him, my grandfather told me, my father will tell my son, and I'll tell my grandson. Yes, in that order, old traditions. I pray we never see one of these monsters. I'm Matisse, and an interesting fact that I learned recently was that out in the West, when they went on long buffalo hunts and someone died, it was necessary to bring them back to their home community. So let's just say that Grandpa Jean-Baptiste dies on the hunt. They would bury him in a shallow grave with a marker, and when the hunt was over, they would dig him up, put him under all the hides so the smell of dead Grandpa Jean-Baptiste wouldn't be too bad, and they would bring them back to their homeland and give him a proper burial. It was important to them that their dead came back home and were laid to rest with the rest of the family. A lot of them were very Catholic and firmly believed that the dead must be buried on sacred ground or else their souls would wander restlessly. Apparently, European settlers and First Nations did not follow this practice. They would bury them where they died. I think it's pretty sound advice that if you come across any oddity in the woods that you should run away as fast as you can, especially a bear walker or a floating orb. So, good. I'm an Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Chippewa. When I was young, my mom would tell me and my siblings stories. One of them was about twisted, spiteful people who were knowledgeable about medicine, spiritual power, but that they used it in a bad way. It was said that such people could turn into bears or shapeshifters. We called them bear walkers, and they moved only at night. Weird Wolf Guy mentioned will-o-wisps, and his story is similar to mine. We were taught that these balls of light were the sign of a bear walker, and that if we saw one, we were supposed to run away as fast as we could. I'm half and half Apache and half Cherokee. I know plenty of lore, but I have a story about coyotes and shapeshifting that I personally experienced if anybody is interested in hearing it. Edit. Alright, it's maybe not the most exciting, but here it is. I was living on the res, and I was way out in the middle of nowhere, even in res standards. It was nighttime, and I was watching the full moon outside. I remember it was so beautifully bright that I could see almost everything. It wasn't uncommon to hear coyotes around here, though you saw them less than you heard them. In spite of this, I saw a few coyotes trotting off a little ways in an opening bathed in the full moon. I remember thinking that they must be up to no good, because coyote are rarely up to any good. Oddly, I didn't hear them, even though coyotes are louder and more talkative when traveling at night. Well, I was gazing out the window near our front door when I heard my mother calling me from outside. I specifically remember that she said I had left my backpack in the car and needed to get it to do my homework. I thought nothing of it and began to put on my shoes. Suddenly, every hair on my body stood straight up. The air seemed wrong. It was at this time that my mother walked in from the kitchen and said that dinner was almost ready and I needed to wash up. She saw my shoes on and immediately sensed something wasn't right. She asked if somebody was outside. I said she was. Of course, no, she wasn't. She had been in the kitchen the whole time. I took a last look out the window facing the open field, and I saw a coyote waiting in the light of the full moon. It then stood up on its hind legs like a person and walked into the woods. I would stake my life on this story's authenticity. This is also not the only story I have of my parents' voices speaking to me while I'm alone. I come from the Lumbee tribe, which has a lot of controversy to begin with, but I'll share a family story. My great-grandmother was supposedly the local witch doctor in her town for a majority of her life. Growing up, I always thought these sort of stories were total bullshit and just my dad messing with me. He and his family would always say how I was her namesake, and even if I didn't want to accept it, we had some weird synchronicities in our family and assumed it was because of her. The day she passed away, my dad was out in the garden when he immediately stood up and thought he heard her screaming from afar. At that time, he lived in a separate state from her, but the screaming sounded like her voice, and it really freaked him out. He goes inside the house to call and check on her when suddenly the phone rings. It's his mother, telling him how his grandmother had just passed away and he needs to head home. Another weird thing in our family is that whenever I have a dream with my dad in it, even if he only appears for a brief second, without failure, he calls me the next day. Every goddamn time this man is in my dreams, I wake up and know that he'll be calling me sometime that day. Best part? He says the same thing happens when I appear in his dreams. Him and I aren't terribly close in the sense that I haven't seen him in person in 2 years, and we maybe chat on the phone once a month or so. Granted, it's nothing too spooky, but I always found it really interesting that his family and I have these minor happenings, and we usually just chalk it up to being Lumbee.